Medical testing is a little bit like a fly's eye, right? When we look at something, we have a single lens, right, in each eye, and we stereoscopic vision and we see what we see. Whereas a fly has many lenses on its eye. It's a compound lens, it's a compound eye. And medical testing is like that. In order to actually understand what's going on with the heart, you need to look at it through different lenses, different tests, and then put it together and say, oh, now we think we have at least this, a reasonable assimilation of actually what's going on here.
Hello and welcome back to the Vibrant Wellness Podcast. I'm Dr. Emmie Brown here with my fabulous co-host Melissa Gentile. Today's guest, Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, is a trailblazer in the field of longevity and performance medicine, challenging everything we thought we knew about aging and vitality. A board-certified interventional cardiologist and longevity expert, Dr. Gladden is the founder of Gladden Longevity Human Performance and Longevity Optimization, a center that fuses advanced diagnostics, precision therapeutics, and cutting-edge science to help individuals become biologically younger while optimizing every system of their body. With decades of experience and a relentless curiosity for what's possible, Dr. Gladden brings a powerful perspective on reversing biological age and living with intention, strength, and clarity. In this episode, we explore the science of human performance, the evolving frontiers of longevity medicine, and what it takes to thrive at any age. Dr. Gladden, thank you so much for being here.
No, it's great to be here, guys. Thank you so much.
Dr. Gladden, so I want to start us off with a little bit on your background. It's great to have you on today. But what sparked your interest or kind of your shift from interventional cardiology to longevity and performance? How'd you get to where you are now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I was practicing interventional cardiology, which I did for 25 years. And I was going along having a good time doing that, right? I really loved the work. I loved all the innovation that was coming along. And then what happened was in my 50s, I got sick. I basically was putting on weight. I was losing strength. I was basically really exhausted all the time. So that even when I would get a good night's sleep, it was very difficult to ever feel rested. And then when I would come under pressure or stress, I would find myself kind of going over this cliff of depression, right? Like I want out of here kind of depression. And I was also developing brain fog. And my father, died with dementia, right? So all that's very concerning to me. And so I went in and I got tested by one of my colleagues and I was told, hey, everything checks out for your age. You're just getting older. Why don't you take an antidepressant? And I had to tell you, that was one of the more existential moments in my life, right? To think that it's just all going to be downhill from here, right? So I rejected the advice, and that's when I kind of threw myself into the functional integrative age management medicine space. And it took me 2.5 years with the help of others, of course, but I was able to figure out everything that was wrong. And once I'd reversed everything, I just felt amazing again. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've been practicing sick care, not health care. I can't do that anymore. I really want to focus on optimizing health. And that's turned into optimizing longevity and the lives we lead here while we're here and, everything we can do. So as you know, we're really kind of devoted to a number of questions. One is how good can we be? Another one is how do we make 100 the new 30? How do we live well beyond 120? Crack the Hayflick limit. How do we live young for a lifetime? And really also, how do we develop a 300-year-old mind, right? So the target for us in longevity is not just a 30-year-old body when we're 100 or 120, but how do we develop a 300/3,000-year-old perspective on life, right? Where that deep understanding, tranquility, equanimity, because I think that leads to really elevating humanity, if you will, what it is to be human and to be on the planet. And that's really, I'm excited about that. It gives me like, oh my gosh, what a fun thing to do. So, yeah.
It's a beautiful perspective. Yeah, I love the start of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And that leads me into my next question. You've been quoted on JJ Virgin's podcast as saying, aging gracefully, more like defying it all together. I'm aiming for a 30-year-old body with a 300-year-old mind. So I'm wondering, Dr. Gladden, what drives you and keeps you excited to live longer and healthier? And what's on your bucket list? Because I imagine you have a big bucket list if this is the goal to live this long.
Well, there you go. I think for me, it's what drives me forward is continuing to elevate my own life, right? So, in other words, the book that I wrote, 100 is the New 30, is broken down into 4 different circles, and we've added a 5th. And the first circle is life energy. And I would say it's the expansion of the life energy circle that really keeps me completely fascinated. I'm also fascinated by the science, right? So I'm right now going super deep on quantum computing, right? I don't know if you've been tracking that, but what's happening in that space is just unbelievable. Everything that you think you know about the universe, you have no idea about, right? It's really, really cracking the code on so many cool things. So I'm eternally curious, and I'm constantly learning. And I also, I remember when I was 3 years old walking down the street and I was coming back from a pond where I'd been catching little pollywogs and frogs and things like that. And I remember literally walking down the street thinking to myself, one day I'm going to become wise. And I was also debating the existence of God in my head. Does God exist? Because I was going to Sunday school at the time, right? So I'm debating the existence of God, and I'm deciding that someday I want to become wise. And that's actually never left me, right? So I feel like I've been on such a spiritual path in conjunction with the health path. And when you think about aging gracefully, it's really what boils down to is actually making peace with decline, with loss, right? With loss of capability. And I think the idea of living young for a lifetime is not only to maintain capability, physical capability, but to expand capability, right? Expand capability both physically, intellectually, relationally, spiritually. And I think that gets me excited every day. Like if I can continue to keep expanding, creating, we can go down a lot of rabbit holes with this, but it's to me that's just a super fun way to live. So yeah.
And how are you defining true health span versus lifespan? We don't just want to live longer, but we want to live better.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, yeah, I say that if I got hit by a bus going home today, I'd be okay with that, right? It's not really a fear of death that I have. I think, I'm just on to the next adventure, right? And so that's pretty cool too. What I think, bothers me is decline. And when I was growing up, my grandmother, my mom's mom, began this, I think in her 70s or thereabouts. And she would tell me constantly, Jeff, it's hell to get old. You don't ever want to get old. It's hell to get old. Every time I would see her, she would be telling me this, right? So I'm like, well, I guess I don't want to get old. And then my mother picked up that mantra, right? So I think part of the motivation for me is to avoid the loss of capability, right? And being able to continue to do the things I want to do. So I think that's a big part of it. Yeah.
And speaking of the physical aspect of expansion, I've seen on your website and some of your socials, you're on mountaintops and you're extremely active. And
Yeah.
I'd love to hear about what are you loving right now in terms of your physical fitness?
Yeah, I'm loving the mountain biking right now. I've been hammering out some amazing rides on the mountain bike, just like crushing these rides. And you know, when it comes to performance, when it comes to life, quite honestly, I think all of life comes down to one thing.
What is that one thing? Please tell
What
us.
is that one thing? Okay, that one thing is, I think, optimizing our nervous system, right? How we think, what we feel, what we believe to be true, what we think is possible, what we believe about our past, what we believe about the future, how we move through space. And so when I'm out there hammering a mountain bike ride, I go into a flow state and my nervous system is really at peace. And yet I'm, allowing my brain to basically solve the problems and the puzzles that are in front of me, right? I'm not forcing it. And yet you get into this flow state and you're just whipping through these trees and up and down and over these jumps and whatever you're doing, right? And it's just, oh my gosh, it's like being completely engaged. I just love it so much. And to have the cardiovascular capacity to do it at such a high speed, I find myself passing almost everybody else out there, right? Unless it's like a pro rider that goes by, right? So I love being able to perform at a high level. I'm running at a high level again. Every chance I get to get in the ocean and surf or body surf or whatever, I love that too. Snowboard if I get a chance to do that. So I'm loving the guitar as well. I played the guitar since I was 10. And
it's fantastic.
I keep writing new stuff, playing with new sounds, whatever. So anyway, yeah. It's good.
I love that you bring up music as something that engages the mind and our motor skills. This is something I've heard when you have the combination of the two. This is very beneficial for cognitive preservation and advancement and functioning overall. So that's fantastic. And it makes me think you're so well rounded. If you have somebody listening, maybe a patient listening, and they're feeling like they want to focus on healthy aging, and maybe they're not very active. I mean, where do you suggest people begin to even explore? I wonder about mountain biking. How did you start to? Was that something you were doing for a long time, or how did you fall upon that? And how do you suggest others find that passion?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great question. And I think the way to start, the easiest way to start is to go back in your life and pick an age when you felt your best. Just think back to that age. Could be 18, 16, could be 22, 25, whatever it was, right? 30, I don't know. Some people pick 40. Go back to that age if you're listening to this and think about what it felt like to be at that age. And then claim that age. This is the most powerful thing you can do. Every morning you wake up, whatever that age is, right? I wake up 27 every day, right? And I'm working on 18, but I wake up 27 every day. And if you wake up that age and for some reason you don't feel that age, then you say, okay, what do I need to do to get back to that age? And in life, we only get the answers to the questions that we're asking, right? So if we're asking, right? So if we're asking, well, how do I get around? How do I compensate for the fact that I can't do this or that? Or what am I going to do because my energy is low or whatever? Those are the answers you get. But if you say, my primary question is, how do I get back to being 27? Then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, what do I need to do that, right? Well, now let me start going into that. And that will fuel your journey right there, right? And will continue to fuel your journey. So I think that's the starting place.
Because we lived it, so we can go back and we can think about that experience, not this unknown answer to this question.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you talk about 120 or 150 or people want to live 300 or whatever, I mean, it's so abstract. Nobody even knows what that means, right? You can't relate to it. But I know what it is to be young. We each know what it is to be young. So that becomes the focal point. Yeah.
Right. And it might not be something physical. It might be painting or something that brings joy and can inspire that mind stimulation. I think that's fabulous.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna kind of say the same thing there. Just the fact that can be so personalized, because we can think of all different things that we can bring into our lifestyle to make us healthier, to help us live longer, to increase our health span. But coming at it from that perspective, it really picks out like what is kind of the pain point for that individual, instead of just like, here's a template or a cookie cutter plan, or here's what's been proven, or here's what's in the literature. It's like, well, what's special to this, bio individual person. So I love that.
Yeah, I've had some insights recently into the meaning of life, actually. In the middle of some deep and fairly profound meditations, when you really get in touch with consciousness directly, I don't know if you guys have had the opportunity to do that, right? So you're like directly in touch with consciousness. It's like, oh my gosh, it's just pure love, right? Pure love just flowing in, right? And what does love love to do? Well, love loves to love, but love also loves to create. And so this ever unfolding universe, multiverse that we live in, right, with all this quantum energy and everything going on, love loves to create. And what's the feedback loop on creation? It's joy. So love creating joy, right? So from a loving place, my purpose in life, for me, the meaning of life is from a loving place to create joy. And that's all there is. And you can overlay that on top of anything that you're doing. It could be a relationship, it could be a business, it could be a hobby, it could be whatever. But from a loving place, creating joy, and realizing that actually everything is going to be okay, right? So when you realize that there's all this love pouring into you, the reason we don't feel it is because we're resisting it on some level. We have blockages around that. It's like, no, but I'm concerned about that, and I'm worried about this, and I've got that. And what happens if that doesn't happen? And all these things, right? But if you clear out all the garbage, so to speak, right, and just let love pour in, then you realize that really what you're here to do is to receive that love, put your own personality coloring to it, your own humor, your own whatever, and radiate it back out. So it's just love creating joy, and everything's going to be okay. When you can live in that space, right? When you get to a point where this is a 300-year-old mind, 3,000-year-old mind. When you live in that space, now everything just flows, and life is beautiful, and you just want to be here more days simply because today is so wonderful. And I think that's really a big key, because when you're able to let go of stress, right? Stress has such a massive aging effect. Look at every president that ever took office, right? How much they age in 4 years. So if you can actually decrease stress and really make peace with why you're here and have a real sense of purpose, and it's fueled by love creating joy, for me, you can adopt your own, but for me, that works out great. So.
Can you bring in some examples of maybe some patients or clients that you worked with kind of on this before, where they come in with maybe some physical ailments and they had to do a lot more mental, emotional work to kind of decrease stress and maybe find a little bit more joy in their life?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have some people in the office today that have been with us for about 4 years, and they fly their own plane. He flies his own plane. They come in as a couple. And, we do testing here using a brain tap neurocheck, where we hook people up, put clips on their wrists, and we measure their nervous system, right? So we can measure parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system balance. And we get a report on kind of how all that's going. And we could tell that this guy was extremely stressed, right? And so it was having a big impact on his neurohormonal health, on his brain health. Everything was being impacted by it. And so I brought it up to him, and he said, yeah, I handle stress really well. I said, well, tell me about that. He said, well, when I'm flying my plane, maybe something stressful going on, but I'm able to compartmentalize it. I'm able to push it over to the side so I can focus on flying the plane. And my response was, yeah, that's great that you can do that, to focus on the plane and the flying and keep safe.
Thank goodness.
Right?
Well, yeah.
But the stress is still being held in your body somewhere, right? You haven't really gotten rid of it. And so he really thought about that for a minute. It's like, oh, okay. So I guess the light bulb went on. I'm actually holding this stress in my system. It's a, yes, you're holding this in your system. So we got him doing brain tap, actually, which is a photobiomodulation binaural beats headset that you wear. You can put yourself in different brain states, like theta for deep meditation, or alpha, or delta for sleep, or gamma for flow states. And he's doing it twice a day, and you just came in and we just reviewed it, and his nervous system is improving. And it's like, how's the stress? Well, it's getting better. I'm feeling better. I'm feeling more relaxed. And so as people actually work on optimizing their nervous system, they can actually get to a point where they're taking stress out of the system. That being said, he's functioning at a much higher level than he ever has physically. He was extolling all the wonderful sex he and his wife had been having. They're in their 60s, and he thought they would never access that again, but they're so happy that they are. So everything is kind of coming forward physically, but we're now making progress kind of on the psychospiritual side, which is super fun to see. Yeah.
And I'm trying to imagine, you said photobiomodulation, Dr. Gladden. So is this low-level laser, it's a headset combined with audio?
Yeah, it's audio, and it also puts light into your ears, into the blood vessels of the ears. And then it's flashing lights into your closed eyes. So it's not laser, but it's photobiomodulation. You can dial up the intensity of the of the light, and you can dial up the volume. And you can get to a point where, because of the binaural beats, are you familiar with that?
Yes.
It's a little different frequency in each ear, right? So your brain is trying to make sense of that. So it kind of fuses your hemispheres together to make it work. And you can get to a point where it's just like you just take off into this really cool meditative state. It's very, very fun. So
very cool. Is that what you're recommending in general? Oh, sorry, Melissa. I just want to know real quick. It's in terms of are there types of meditation? I'm thinking about transcendental, or is this, using a device like this, if we can tap into it quicker, I would say that would be something to turn towards.
We've had people that have been big meditators for many years, and we come in and we test their nervous systems, and they're still not that great, right?
Interesting.
So, right. Interesting, right? It depends on what you're meditating on, right? And so, but being able to get into that state of theta, which is, right next to delta. That's really that's really, quite honestly, the frequency of the universe. When you do deep meditation, you realize that everything is functioning at theta. Then you can go into this state of just being completely at peace, completely calm. And it's there that you actually start to get in touch with some of these other insights I was sharing. So, yeah.
So I want to jump into some of the clinical aspects here in terms of longevity and key biomarkers that you like to use, Dr. Gladden, to assess biological age. I don't think there's a standard right now, but what are you using? What do you feel is, maybe a good measure of how somebody's doing right now? Is there anything as far as prognostic value for longevity markers that you're using at this point?
Sure. That's another great question. So the way we think about it is you're a mosaic of many biological ages. And so there isn't a single biological age. I think one of the greatest disservices to this whole field is the concept that you have a single biological age. Because if you're 10 years younger than your chronological age or 5 years younger, then you pat yourself on the back and you say, oh, I'm great, right? But I think in actual fact, we're only as young as our oldest biological age, right? And that's where we need to focus the work. So we're looking at, things related to the hallmarks of aging, like telomeric age, mitochondrial function, right? We have several lenses for these.
Right.
Cardiovascular age, a heart age, a blood vessel age, a brain age. We can measure all of these. And then you can look at bone ages, muscle ages. You can construe the word age with kind of status, if you will. And so when you start to look at these, we are looking at probably 60 or 65 of these now. And so we like all of them, because what we find is that, medical testing is a little bit like a fly's eye, right? When we look at something, we have a single lens, right, in each eye, and we stereoscopic vision and we see what we see. Whereas a fly has many lenses on its eye, right? So it's a compound lens. It's a compound eye. And medical testing is like that. In order to actually understand what's going on with the heart, you need to look at it through different lenses, different tests, and then put it together and say, oh, now we think we have at least a reasonable assimilation of actually what's going on here. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, I had a heart test done and it was this, they did an EKG and it was fine. That's just one test. That's just one lens. And you really don't know until you actually get enough of the lenses to look at a thing to know what's really happening. So, yeah.
Yeah. So multifactorial testing, I imagine it's quite comprehensive. And so I'm imagining maybe just hypothetically, if you have someone coming in mid-30s with a family history of cardiovascular disease, coronary artery disease, let's say, but they feel great. I'm sure you have, people coming in of all ages who say, I don't have any symptom complaints, but I want to optimize. That's a big space. So what kind of screening tests are you recommending for this maybe 30-something-year-old male?
So the first thing, great question. The first thing we would do is do their genetics, right? Just because they have a family history doesn't mean they got those SNPs, right? So they can be worried about stuff and they don't even need to be worried about it, right? And so the first thing we do is a genetic test to see what is their cardiovascular risk. Right. We like Intellex DNA. I don't have any financial relationship to this company, but they do really excellent reporting. I know that Vibrant does some nice genetic reporting now as well on a number of your panels. We like those too. But anyway, we'll do a genetic test and then see, where is the issue for them? Do they have genetically, are they handicapped with reverse cholesterol transport, right? Reverse cholesterol transport is much more important than your cholesterol levels. Right, we put all this emphasis on cholesterol level and ApoB and LP little a and and ApoB, but really they are not as important as reverse cholesterol transport. So reverse cholesterol transport is the ability to actually get cholesterol out of plaque or cell membrane back to the liver. And it turns out that ability is what's really the most important thing. There are technologies being developed right now to actually facilitate, to upregulate reverse cholesterol transport. And what they're showing is that they're actually eradicating heart disease in animal models.
Wow.
Right? Yeah, because it's really the hot ticket. So one thing we would look at is we can measure reverse cholesterol transport or an approximation of it. So we'd want to know that. We'd want to know their cholesterol profile. We find a lot of hidden insulin resistance for people when we do 2-hour glucose tolerance tests. So that's a big driver of cardiovascular risk, right? So we'd want to do that. We want to look at a carotid neo-intramedullary thickness test, right? So we can see what the artery is doing. We have a device here where we can measure blood pressure and measure central aortic pressure non-invasively, and also get an idea of the stiffness of the arteries, right? So arteries stiffen up when senescent cells form in the walls of the arteries, right? And so you can get an idea where somebody is in the aging process. Then we can look at the glycocalyx, right? The glycocalyx is what really lubricates the arteries. If you have a healthy glycocalyx, you don't get heart disease, right? So we can intuit that through several different tests we do, and now we're getting a hold of a scope where you can actually look below the tongue and actually look at the capillaries and see the glycocalyx. You can
fascinating!
See right? And then you can rebuild the glycocalyx with certain supplements. There's one called Revasca that's particularly good at doing that. Arterosil's another one. And then, once you understand that, we put people on a bike and we have them do a cardiopulmonary exercise test. And what that shows us is not only their heart rate response to exercise, but their VO2 max, which is their maximum heart pumping capacity, and then an anaerobic threshold, which is a measure of how in shape they are, when they basically go from aerobic only metabolism into needing to add anaerobic metabolism to support the mission. The more in shape you are, the further you can go just on aerobic metabolism. So we look at that. And then we actually look at a curve of left ventricular function married to heart rate. So what should happen is as they're climbing this ramp on the bike where it's harder to pedal every 20 seconds, heart rate should go up and their stroke volume should go up on the left ventricle. The amount of blood being pumped should go up evenly. What happens is when they're not getting adequate blood supply to the muscle, is that the stroke volume starts to taper off. And you can see that very clearly. And the heart rate has to accelerate to compensate for that because your legs want blood. They don't care how they get it, right? So if the stroke volume falls off, heart rate has to increase to make up the difference, right? So you still get the same number of liters per minute. And we can track that very, very with high fidelity. And putting all those lenses together, right? Now we actually start to get an idea of where somebody is from a cardiovascular. And we also look at the nervous system because we know stress will drive such a big part of cardiovascular disease. So again, it's multiple lenses to see what's actually going on. And once you've deconstructed the problem, then you can actually construct a solution. Right now, it's like, oh, well, for these genes, we need to do this, this, and this. For this, we need to do that. And for this is this, and this is that. And here we go. And the next thing you know, people are doing great. So, but it's the beauty of deconstruction first before making recommendations that leads to the best results. So,
absolutely, a lot of data points there. And while we're on the topic of cardiovascular disease prevention, what about the Clearly Heart scan? Are you using that?
We are. Yeah, we think it's useful. One of the things I learned as a cardiologist is that in order to understand what's going on, you need two things, essentially. You need more than one test, but you need two things. You need to know both the anatomy and the physiology. Right? So
Absolutely.
if you just have the anatomy, you don't really, a heart cath wasn't doing it. But clearly CTA is really a heart cath done with a CAT scan, right? Trying to look at plaque. And it's also a combination of a CAT scan and intravascular ultrasound to map the plaque. So you've got anatomy, but you don't have function, right? So you get function from the cardiopulmonary exercise test, from looking at arterial function and glycocalyx scores and things like that. So when you marry those two together, now all of a sudden you have a more complete picture. Now you can make good recommendations for somebody. So the Clearly CTA plays a role. We don't do it for everybody, but if we see enough in the other areas to think that it's worthwhile spending the $2,000 or whatever it is to get one, and the contrast load and the radiation load, then we'll send people over for it.
Right, kind of a secondary test.
It's a secondary test, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Gosh, I wish this was the standard. At least what you said as far as the screening tests for heart disease. I mean, you think about the standard lipid panel, and that's it. I mean, blood pressure, if they're going in, hopefully they're, with virtual visits. I hope people aren't doing that for primary care only and skipping physical exams completely. But it kind of blows me away when you talk through such a comprehensive screening program.
Yeah. And there are other tests we can do too. I'm giving you kind of the basics, depending on what somebody's dealing with, where they are in life, things like that. So, but if you're listening to this, and you've claimed your age, right? Now the question is, what do I have to do to get back to that age? Well, what you really need to do is, if you're struggling with something, is to deconstruct that problem, to understand it thoroughly before you start treating it. It can be treated, but you can spend a lot of time and waste a lot of time and waste a lot of money just throwing things at it, hoping it works. And we try to step away from that. So, yeah.
And how are you tracking progress in the patients that come to see you in your clinic? Are you recommending wearables? You mentioned a VO2 max previously.
Mhm.
Are you using anything like questionnaires? Like what do you feel like is the best way to track progress in these types of things?
All the above, right? So repeat testing, conversations with people, questionnaires, wearables, all of it, everything we can get. And, doing repeat testing, you don't have to redo the genetics, right? Once you have that, you've got it, right? But other things, other variables that shift and move, you're going to repeat hormone levels, you're going to repeat hormone metabolites, you're going to repeat thyroid and resting metabolic rates. Another thing we see that's missed all the time is people with hypothyroidism, where their blood tests are quote unquote normal. So we do resting metabolic rates on every single client. And we find people that have normal thyroid that are actually either hypothyroid or just about to be hypothyroid. And they actually feel so much better. Like, we had a woman come in, very high functioning woman in her 50s, worked for an oncology company. It was like a regional manager, fell off a bike, hit her head, had a concussion, was at a very prominent medical school here in Dallas, in their concussion clinic for like 8, 10, 12 weeks, something like that, right? Trying to get better, making no progress, barely able to kind of keep her job, right? Like, could barely show up. And very fluent, gregarious, great personality, and yet kind of a shadow of herself, right? With this concussion. And so she wasn't making progress. So we did this DIO2 SNP for her. And sure enough, she was homozygous. She couldn't convert T4 to T3. All we did, she was not hypothyroid. Her resting metabolic rate was normal. We just gave her some T3, a small amount of T3. And within a week, she graduated out of the concussion clinic, right?
Amazing.
Yeah. So it's really about deep understanding. I think this is missed all the time. People focus so much on the therapy. Oh, we'll do red light and we'll do ozone and we'll do all this stuff for you and to you. It's like, yeah, but what do you actually need, right? What do you actually need? That's the real question. Not what can you offer me? Well, what do you
Truly
need?
personalize it.
That's
You think
right.
about so much time spent doing trial and error, compounded thyroid, desiccated thyroid after doing levothyroxine, and it's trial and error. If you could test a SNP and trial it after knowing that it may be more effective for that
That's right.
individual. That's what we're working towards. That's what we need. So
Exactly.
we're learning about SNPs today because there's so many SNPs. It's not just MTHFR, people, right? That's also the message. There's a million other SNPs that are going to be helpful, and this one sounds to be extremely helpful for you in practice. Yep. And so I'm so glad to hear that for our listeners. I'd love to know about personalized nutrition specifically. So, and I'm sure there's some SNPs you could share with us there possibly. But when you say personalized nutrition plans, I think everybody wants to know, how should I be eating? We don't want to just do keto or paleo or, AIP just because we read it and the book is selling off the shelf. So right. How do you assess for personalized nutrition plans, Dr. Gladden?
Well, I think one of the problems with diets in general is that they all start with the food, right? It's like, okay, well, this is a good food, that's a bad food. Here's a good way to eat. Here's a bad thing to do, right?
Right.
With an actual fact, what we've found empirically is that it really, to know what a diet is, you have to start with the individual. So you do have to know their genetics, right? You have to know what's their cardiovascular risk, what's their cancer risk, how well can they process glucose and carbs. You need to know the genes that are related to that. There's a number of SNPs that will help you with that. And then after that, you've really got to understand their gut. How well do they digest? Are they making enough stomach acid, right? Do they have bacterial overgrowth in the gut or yeast overgrowth in the gut? And then do they have parasites? Do they have pathogenic bacteria or viruses, right, that are causing a problem? And then you actually need to know what's their immune system doing in response to various foods. Once you understand that and you understand the bigger picture of what you're trying to get the diet to accomplish, like we want the diet to help their brain work better or keep them safe from cardiovascular disease or treat metabolic syndrome or help them protect them from cancer genetic predispositions that they have, then that colors the whole thing. And once you have looked through it through multiple lenses, now all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, here's the foods you should be eating, right? Knowing that the body loves variety, quite honestly. You don't want to eat the same thing over and over and over again. Oatmeal may be good for some people, but you don't want to eat it every day, right? Eggs may be great for some people, but you don't want to eat them every day. So I try to go to the grocery store and buy different things almost every time I go in, right? Just to kind of mix it up. And your body loves that variety. So that being said, we're more plant-based because we know there's so many good things in plants. I'm not vegan or vegetarian. I eat meat. I eat red meat. I eat chicken. I eat fish. I eat, different things, but I don't need to feel like I need to eat meat every day. So, and I think there's way too much pressure on protein.
Everybody's pushing to say that. Yeah,
everybody's pushing protein like it's God's gift to the planet, but it's actually not. People on high protein diets die sooner. So, yes, older people need to make more muscle, but, pounding protein is not how you build muscle, right? You build muscle by actually optimizing hormones and optimizing some growth hormone release and then using the right amino acids to actually build it at the right time. That's how we build muscle all the time for people. We don't have to pound protein to do it. So there's so much misinformation out there. I don't know. It's kind of scary a little bit.
I do want to ask you, Dr. Gladden. So we have kind of a split audience between patients and providers on this show. But for providers that are listening in the same field, what should providers shift toward if they want to help patients live longer and better? And we kind of started to talk a little bit about the perspective shifts that you have on this, but I want to go a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I think one of the things that happens is that we're all trained at medical schools and we all get trained really in sick care, quite honestly. And then some of us transition into functional medicine or integrative medicine or whatever we want to call it, right? Which is kind of getting at the root cause of the issue as opposed to treating the symptoms, right? And then we start to equate that functional approach with longevity medicine. And we can almost construe that anything we do is longevity medicine, right? If we're lowering your cholesterol, well, that's longevity medicine because we're protecting, right? If we're doing this, it's longevity medicine. If we help you build bone density, it's longevity medicine. And so actually the way I think about it is that there's symptom-driven medicine, how we were all trained. Then there's, functional medicine, root cause medicine. But true longevity medicine is the root cause of the root cause. It's actually going after the hallmarks of aging, the drivers of aging, the mitochondrial dysfunction, the shortening telomeres, the increasing senescent cells, the increasing inflammation, right? All the different things that constitute the hallmarks of aging. They are both expressions, phenotypic expressions of aging, and also accelerants of aging. When your telomeres get short, your mitochondria don't work. When your mitochondria don't work, you don't have enough energy to repair your DNA. When that happens, you get a mutation which shortens the telomeres. Everything feeds off. And this is why it's an exponential process. Aging is an exponential process. It accelerates as we go. It's like a tornado spinning up. And so if you don't focus on interrupting that momentum that's played out through the hallmarks of aging, you're really missing the boat. And I think that's really where longevity medicine shines, is there. Focusing on those hallmarks of aging. I find many clinics don't focus on them. They don't even measure them. So this is the level that you need to be working at if you're working on longevity, I think, is actually let's go at what's driving the current in the river, right? Not just the boats on top of the surface and building a bigger motor. Let's actually see if we can deconstruct what's driving the current and then interrupt those processes. And I think that's really true longevity medicine, if you will. And all of them are important, right? The symptoms are important. The functional piece is important. The health is important. But this is a piece that I think is often overlooked. And then I do think that the thing that binds all of that is the whole psychospiritual life energy space, right? And you put all that together, I think now you start to have a really comprehensive idea of what's, how you help somebody live a long time.
So how do you empower patients to take control of their long-term health? Because I think something that comes up often is patients will kind of come in with a chronic symptom. Maybe they have a diagnosis of something. They have this whole like story around like, I'm not well, I have this diagnosis, or this is what's wrong with me, or I'm broken.
Yep.
And they're coming to the provider as like the source of truth of like, you know how to fix me and I don't know how to fix me. And they're kind of putting the power in the provider. So how are you kind of shifting that narrative and putting the authority back into the patient?
Well, the way we do that is we work with people that are actually, you know, have masters in psychology, people that are working in psychedelic assisted therapies, things like that, right? So I think one of the keys is actually to help people look under their own covers, so to speak, and see what's there. Because a lot of people have a symptom, but it's actually a symptom of an internal problem, right? Like they're living in reaction to something, or they've internalized some trauma, and now it's showing up in their knee, and then that knee is now throwing their left hip off, and now the left hip is throwing out the back, right? So it's a chain reaction that sort of happens, and if you're ever going to actually fix it, this is why going into the life energy circle to help people understand how to resolve trauma, right? Because all of us have suffered trauma. I don't know a single person that hasn't suffered trauma. And what happens is we all live in reaction to that trauma, right? And so we're all going through life on tilt, right, in reaction to that trauma. And I think one of the tasks in longevity medicine is to actually help people, you know, parse apart that trauma, understand it deeply, understand what happened, who did what was I responsible for, what was somebody else responsible for, and then get to a point where you can actually forgive everybody involved, including yourself, right? And then once you forgive everyone, right, which basically means dropping down the barrier. Like if we're all getting along, right? So there's really unconditional positive regard amongst the three of us, right? If something were to happen, we would put a wall up and say, well, I'm not going to allow positive energy to go this way or whatever, right? Or I'm going to put a wall up to protect myself from whatever, right? So forgiveness for me is dropping the barrier. Say, no, I'm going to allow unconditional positive regard. So if you get to a point where you go and you understand the trauma and you forgive everyone involved, including yourself, now you have the opportunity to actually transcend it. And when you transcend the trauma, you actually become grateful for everything that ever happened, because it brought us to this conversation here right now. And it's given us more empathy, more insight, more wisdom than we would have had otherwise. And I tend to think of Earth as an escape room, right? We're born here, and now we have to work our way through all of the different myriad trials that we run into to actually become unencumbered from the traumas that we experience and become the full expression of ourselves, unencumbered by all those things, right? So we get back to this love creating joy scenario, right? So, yeah, anyway, that's how I think about it. So taking people through that process to really allow them to become unencumbered from all the strife that they're carrying, all of a sudden their knee gets better. Or when you fix their knee, it actually works, you know, that kind of thing. So it really takes a comprehensive approach. Most clinics are more like, well, we'll do the biology and leave that to somebody else. But we're like, well, no, that's part of life. Let's do all of it. So
yeah, they're not separate.
They're not separate. Yeah, they're so intertwined. So intertwined, right? Yeah.
We're constantly talking about the counseling piece. Are you referring? Are you bringing in-house counseling and mental health professionals? It's so integral, as you said. And I'm wondering, because there's a lot to consider here, Dr. Gladden, for providers listening, is there provider training? Maybe perhaps one of your, do you have a module or a training course for providers listening who want to learn about longevity med or a reference?
Yeah, we're actually building a course right now. And we'll let you know when we go live with it. We did a little.
I want to take it.
Okay.
Same.
I'll sign up.
We'll be there.
Okay, good. Well, I'll let you know. You can push it. You guys will be lovely to have you, and you can push it out through your network as well. So that would be great. Yeah.
Fabulous. Yeah. All right. One last question. This is jam-packed already, Dr. Gladden. What's one daily practice you never skip?
Well, I'll tell you what I've really gotten addicted to, and it's not ice cream. It's basically, I love getting up in the morning, first thing. I take thyroid, so I get up and I take my thyroid. And then I sit down and I basically journal. And I have a gratitude journal where I start off writing down 3 things that I'm grateful for, 3 things that would make today great. and then a couple of different affirmations. And I sort of start my day that way. And I kind of go into a meditative state while I'm doing it. And it just really makes me so grateful to have the opportunity to be on planet Earth today and from a loving place to create joy. And it's like, oh, okay, this is a beautiful way to start the day. And so that's pretty much what I do. And then from there, I go exercise. So, yeah.
And I'm wondering, is this taking place outside, maybe if possible, the journaling to get that morning light, because that's so important too.
Yeah, I'm in sunlight. Yeah, when I'm doing it.
Okay, just double checking.
Yeah, I'm not under the covers. So, yeah, all good.
Dr. Gladden, thank you so much for coming on the show today and spending the last hour or so with us. I loved everything that we touched on, from perspective shifts and weaving in some philosophy, and just hearing some of your deeper thoughts and themes today was really insightful. And I think our audience is going to take a lot from it. If anyone tuning in today, whether they're a patient, whether they're a provider, or just want to know more about you, where can we find you online?
Yeah. So, the website is gladdenlongevity.com. And if people want to have a free call to talk with us and see if we could be helpful to them, that's fine. If there are providers listening and you'd like to participate in the course, you could go to the website and just send us an email that you'd like to be, and give us your email that you'd like to be included in the Gladden Longevity certification course that we're going to roll out. And then, the book is there. 100 is the new 30. We have a podcast also, used to be Living Beyond 120. Now it's the Gladden Longevity Podcast. And then we're on all the social media things that everybody's on. I'm not on them, but somebody does all that. So anyway, yeah.
Someone's doing it on your behalf. I like that.
Right. That's right. Cool. I create content and they push it out there. So
takes a village.
Yeah, take the village. That takes a city. So
we'll be sure to link these down below for anyone tuning in so you can connect with Dr. Gladden. And again, thank you so much for taking the time with myself and Dr. Emmie today. And until next week, I'm wishing us all vibrant health and wellness. Thank you so much for being here today. Don't forget to leave us a review and subscribe so we can continue to pay it forward together. And remember, the key to longevity is knowledge. Keep learning, growing, and tuning in to the Vibrant Wellness Podcast to discover the latest insights and strategies for optimal health. Join us again next week. And just a reminder, this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The views expressed by guests and hosts are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy of Vibrant Wellness. As always, consult your healthcare provider before applying any recommendations that you heard here today.